her, she's. I'm so sick of woke companies putting their pronouns all over their products. I was just reading Fernanda Pires' book, The Rule of Laws. It's a sort of overview of law over the course of 8,000 years of civilization from ancient Sumeria to the modern age. One of the things that struck me was how the original legislative branch was the church. This is a theme that began in the earliest tribal societies with a chieftain and a shaman. Together, they ruled. It was true of Akhenaten and the priest class in ancient Egypt, and was even true up through the French monarchy, where the three-part government was made up of the king, the aristocrats, and the church. Note how the people weren't represented in their government. As Mrs. Pires relates, the ancient Aryan rulers of northern India had the same setup. See here.
The Brahmin authors of Manu's text were clearly keen to defend their social and ritual privileges and to emphasize the special relationship between king and priest at the top of the Indian social hierarchy. Their agenda, as one contemporary writer has commented, was to tell Brahmins how to behave as true Brahmins, and to tell kings how to behave as true kings. The former were to be devoted to Vedic learning and virtue, whereas the latter were to be devoted to the Brahmins and to ruling their people justly. In the competitive religious environment of northern India, the Brahmins were claiming knowledge of higher and eternal truths, which they could interpret for kings and princes, declaring what the law was in cases of uncertainty. The kings and their officials were supposed to enact the law, not make it. They were the servants of the Dharma. According to the Dharma Shastras, it was for the Brahmin to declare what the law was and for the kings to enforce it.
Why I found this interesting is that historically, there's no separation of church and state. The church decided what the law was based on a holy book, like in ancient Israel, where the priests were also the lawyers, because the Old Testament was the law. I did a video previously related to how laws were mere means to an end, and that the values of a society were the end. Laws are just vehicles by which to arrive at those ends. And who sets the values? In our society, that would be the media. In antiquity, it was the church. Even today, in Islam, they adhere to this older structure, where the law is based on the Quran. So they didn't have chaos or ambiguity. In our system, we're told that whatever the people want is what the government should do. That's fine. But that creates instability as the people engage in fads and fashions. As one new set of values comes in and another set goes out. This reminded me of floating exchange rates among global currencies. See here.
Turns out there's two different types of exchange rates. There's floating and there's fixed. A floating exchange rate is one that fluctuates with the market. So if demand goes up or down or supply goes up and down, the exchange rate is going to change. And the market sets the exchange rate. A fixed exchange rate is when the government takes control and tries to peg one currency's value to another currency. The government doesn't allow market forces to work and they try to keep that exchange rate fixed or at least in some sort of range. It seems like we have that debate a whole lot in economics, right? Should the government do something or should they stay out of our way? We talked about price controls in markets, when we talked about minimum wage, we talked about fiscal policy, monetary policy, and it's the same situation here. I can't tell you if having a floating or a fixed exchange rate's better. I can just tell you what they are and you can decide for yourself.
In Stephen Roach's book, Unbalanced, he talks about how India has a floating exchange rate for its currency. That is to say, its unit of currency, the rupee, is pegged to a number of other currencies in Asia. As they rise, it rises. As they fall, it falls. As opposed to the euro, which is fixed to the dollar. He writes, a fixed exchange rate pegging one nation's currency to another has been viewed by some, like Hong Kong and the United Arab Emirates, as an anchor of macroeconomic stability. Others, especially developing economies like India, Peru, and Pakistan, prefer what is called a managed float, placing limits on the natural gravity of currency movements in an effect to temper the adverse impacts that foreign exchange market volatility might have on embryonic and vulnerable financial systems and economies. At any rate, in looking at the old judicial system in ancient societies, or in modern theocracies within Islam, it occurred to me that in terms of values, they have a fixed value system. That is to say, they can always check what their values are by referring to their holy book, the society's user manual. Whereas in the West, we decoupled from the church. As a result, we have a floating value system which changes with the slightest breeze. This wasn't always the case. When America was founded, it was settled by religious sects who wanted to make a Christian utopia. You had Puritans in Massachusetts, the Quakers in Pennsylvania, and places like Connecticut literally had the Bible as their state constitution. Historian Charles Beard writes, the pioneers on the Connecticut shore had no difficulty agreeing that the scriptures do hold forth a perfect rule for the direction and government of all men. During the Revolutionary War, most battle flags contained a cross, and Samuel Adams said that America was designed to be a Christian Sparta. Today, we're told that there is a separation of church and state, and Aristotle is invoked, whereby he said that the government has three purposes. 1, to do infrastructure. 2, to maintain a military. And 3, to establish a judiciary. But if you read Aristotle in Politics, he actually adds a fourth function of government, to maintain the temple. Somehow, along the way, we forgot this fourth dimension. As a result, we lost a baseline for our value system and our laws. Now it's legislation by whim, with no ethical restraints. The guiding thrust is not towards spirituality, but money. As Tacitus said in ancient Rome, the more numerous the laws, the more corrupt the state. While we have millions of laws, the ancient Israelites only had 10. While many evangelicals spend their time advocating for those 10, they forget that their New Testament whittles it down to just 2. Love your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. When you have a culture with a strong moral bedrock and a sound spiritual core, you don't need a billion laws. As John Adams said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. As you know, The New American has partnered with a platform called Locals recently. It's a for-pay platform where fans can help support the show for like $5. Think of it like seeing a street musician and throwing a few coins in his cup. Besides, if you sign up, I can stop selling my bootleg merch, like the Daniel Natal urinal cake. That was an even worse seller than the Daniel Natal in action figure. Turns out that kids didn't exactly care to see Daniel engaging in an action as he surfs the web, or engaging in an action as he watches TV. These were not big sellers. Embarrassingly, focus groups determined that the in-action figure in particular did slightly better when rebranded as the Daniel Natal voodoo doll. At any rate, drop by our web address at thenewamerican.locals.com if you want to have more intimate contact with the hosts, get additional content not available elsewhere, and if you want to help support the show.